All right, listen, let's just be real for a second. There are fantasy fights, and then there are fantasy fights. The kind that make you sit up, lean forward, and start imagining the chaos. And this one right here is one of those rare ones because we're talking about two absolute legends of women's boxing, two names that don't just belong in the sport, they define the sport. Laila Ali, the undefeated queen who carried the weight of being Muhammad Ali's daughter and still carved out her own greatness, and Claressa Shields, the self-proclaimed GOAT, two-time Olympic gold medalist, world champion across divisions, a fighter who's rewriting what dominance looks like in the modern era. And when you start to picture those two stepping into the same ring, both in their primes, it's like a time machine colliding with destiny. It's not just about who wins or loses, it's about what it says about the past, the present, and the future of the fight game. So buckle up, because this isn't just a break-dough. UN. It's a ride through legacy, evolution, mindset, and the kind of cultural impact that makes combat sports one of the most fascinating things on the planet. You know what's crazy about this whole legacy versus modern era thing? It's not just names on paper. It's literally two different worlds colliding, because on one side you've got Laila Ali, who stepped into the ring carrying not only her gloves, but the shadow of her father, Muhammad Ali, the most iconic fighter that ever lived. And that's a kind of pressure no one else can even imagine, because every jab she threw, every step she took, people weren't just watching her, they were comparing her to the greatest. And that forces you into a different mindset where you're not just trying to beat an opponent, you're trying to prove you belong on a stage that's bigger than boxing itself. And she did it by being this calm, composed, power-punching presence who looked like she was built for the spotlight. But then you look at Claressa Shields, and she comes from this whole new world where women's boxing is finally getting the spotlight, where sports science, nutrition, conditioning, and access to elite coaching are all at her fingertips. And she's not carrying a father's legacy. She's building her own, carving out this GOAT identity. And she's got receipts to back it up, 2 Olympic golds, multiple world titles, and an energy that feels almost futuristic compared to the old school. So when you think about these two, it's almost like you're asking what happens if you take raw, unshakable legacy and throw it into the cage. With modern evolution, like who comes out on top? The one who had to survive in a time when women's boxing wasn't celebrated and had to command respect through dominance, or the one who was born into an era where the whole infrastructure is designed to produce greatness? And that's what makes the debate so fascinating, because it's not just comparing athletes, it's comparing eras, mindsets, and the VE environment that created them. And once you start peeling that back, you realize that it's not only about power versus speed or old school training versus modern conditioning. It's also about the psychology, the way Ali carried this royal bloodline weight on her shoulders, while Shields fights like she's got something to prove every single second, which bleeds right into their fighting styles, because one brings that patient, composed sniper energy, and the other brings that relentless storm-like pressure. When you start digging into the styles and the mindsets of these two, that's when it gets really wild, because Laila Ali, man, she fought like someone who understood exactly what her presence meant. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't trying to prove toughness by brawling. She was calculated, patient, like a hunter waiting for the opening. And when she let her hands go, you could see the discipline, the power in those straight shots, the way she used her height and reach. It was almost surgical. And that came from a mindset where composure was everything. Like she knew the storm of expectations around her, but she never let it crack her. She fought like she belonged in that spotlight, like pressure just rolled off her back. And then you flip it and look at Claressa Shields, and it's almost a polar opposite in energy, because she comes at you like a buzzsaw, high volume combinations, nonstop movement. She overwhelms you with pressure. And the mindset behind that is this unshakable belief that she's not only better than you, she's going to prove it every second of the fight. And she's not waiting for the perfect shot. She's making you break under the weight of her pace. Her confidence bleeds through every punch, and it's not arrogance. It's this almost defiant energy that says, I've put in more work, I've come further, and I'm going to drown you with it. And that's what makes the hypothetical matchup so compelling, because one fighter is saying, I'll find my spot and punish you with precision, while the other is saying, I don't even care about your spot. I'll just suffocate you until you can't breathe. And the clash of those two mindsets is so fascinating because it reflects the eras they come from. Ali grew up in a time when women's boxing wasn't given the same platform, so her style leaned toward proving dominance with control, poise, and undeniable finishes, while Shields grew up in a landscape where the sport was starting to demand entertainment and relentless pace, so her style is built to show audiences that women's boxing can be just as explosive and fast-paced as anything else, and that's where you start to see how these fighting philosophies aren't just personal choices, they're products of the environments, the eras, the way the sport itself evolved around them. When you really break it down, the difference in eras is insane because Laila Ali was fighting in a time when women's boxing barely had a seat at the table. It wasn't promote. Like the men's game, it didn't have the same networks, sponsorships, or fan base, so every time she stepped in the ring, she wasn't just fighting her opponent, she was fighting for legitimacy, and that shaped the way she carried herself, because she had to dominate in such a way that people couldn't deny her. She had to look like a superstar every time just to make people take notice, and that makes her era feel raw, almost underappreciated, like she was swimming upstream against a culture that wasn't ready for women in boxing to be on the front page. And then you flip to Claressa Shields and it's like a whole different universe. She's competing at a time when the infrastructure for women's sports is way more developed. There's Olympic stages, televised events, performance science, recovery technology. Even the dialogue around female athletes has shifted. So instead of trying to prove boxing belongs, she's trying to prove she's the face of this new wave, and that's such a different key. ND of challenge. Because while Laila was pushing for recognition, Claressa is pushing for domination in a sport that's already starting to get its respect. And you see it in how their legacies are being built. Ali was iconic almost in isolation, a star in a world that didn't fully know how to embrace her, while Shields is iconic in the middle of a bigger cultural shift where the audience is bigger, the competition is deeper, and the expectations are higher. And what's wild about comparing those two eras is that it makes you wonder how much of their greatness is pure individual talent and how much of it is the environment. Like if you dropped Shields back in the early 2000s, would she look unstoppable against the competition of that time? And if you put Ali in today's hyper-evolved scene with modern training, nutrition, and exposure, would she be even scarier? And that's where the fantasy fight conversation gets real interesting, because it's not just a clash of styles, it's a clash, time periods. Like asking who wins if you literally bend the timeline and let them collide at their absolute peaks. So if you really imagine this hypothetical matchup, prime Laila Ali versus prime Claressa Shields, it's like the ultimate video game simulation where you crank both sliders up to 100 and just let them go at it. Because Laila brings that long, strong jab, the patience, the knockout power in both hands. She was a finisher, man. She could set traps, control the ring, make you walk into something big, and her composure under pressure was ridiculous. She never looked rattled. She always looked like she was 3 steps ahead. And then you throw Claressa in there with her insane pace, the constant flurries, the slick defense, the ability to transition from offense to defense in a split second, and it becomes this clash of tempo versus timing, power versus pressure. Like, can Laila handle that relentless energy for 10 rounds, or does Claressa eventually walk into something? Huge, trying to push the pace, and what makes it even crazier is the mental side, because Laila fought with this aura of inevitability, like she knew she was going to win before the bell even rang, and that gets into an opponent's head, but Claressa fights like she's fueled by proving you wrong, like she thrives on that resistance. So it's almost like Ali is trying to drown you in presence, while Shields is trying to drown you in volume. And if you actually visualize the fight round by round, the early stages probably look like Laila trying to measure distance, pop the jab, keep things under control, while Claressa is storming in with combinations, forcing Ali to fight at a pace she normally wouldn't. And the big question becomes, who breaks rhythm first? Because if Ali lands something clean and authoritative, suddenly Shields has to respect that power. But if Shields can keep up the storm, keep Ali from settling into her rhythm, then you could see Ali getting dragged into a dogfight she ever wanted. And that's what makes the debate endless, because depending on which moment you freeze in your head, either fighter could look like the winner, And at the end of the day, beyond the punches and strategies, what really makes this fantasy matchup so fascinating is how it represents two entire movements of women's boxing crashing together in one ring. And that symbolism alone says as much about the sport as the actual fight would. And that's the thing. The cultural impact of these two goes way beyond just who lands the better shots. Because Laila Ali wasn't just another champion. She was a symbol. She carried her father's last name like a crown and a burden at the same time. Every time she stepped in the ring, she was carrying the history of Muhammad Ali with her. And that's not just about boxing. That's about civil rights, charisma, being the voice of an era. So when she dominated opponents and retired undefeated, it wasn't just a personal achievement. It was this moment in sports history where people finally looked at women's boxing and thought, damn, this can be elite too. She literally kicked the door open for the generations after her. And then you look at Claressa Shields, and she's the one walking through that door, but instead of just keeping it open, she's trying to tear the hinges off because she's not satisfied with being good for a women's fighter. She wants to be in the same conversation as the greats across the entire sport. She calls herself the GOAT, and she embraces all the heat that comes with that. And you can feel how much it matters to her to put women's boxing on the same level of respect, the same pay, the same spotlight. And when she goes out there, the cultural impact isn't just about her winning. It's about her representing a new standard, showing young girls that you can start in a gym in Flint, Michigan, and fight your way to Olympic gold, world titles, global recognition. And that resonates in a way that's bigger than belts or records. Because when people argue about who would win between Laila and Claressa, they're really arguing about more than just skills. We're arguing about legacy versus progress, about what greatness means in two different worlds, and that's why this whole conversation hits so hard. Because it's not just fantasy matchmaking, it's a lens into how the sport has evolved, how culture has shifted, how women in combat sports have gone from being an afterthought to headlining cards, and that cultural weight is just as fascinating as the fight itself. So when you really zoom out on this whole Laila Ali versus Claressa Shields conversation, what you're looking at isn't just two fighters in a fantasy matchup. You're looking at the entire arc of women's boxing, from legacy to evolution, from proving the sport even belonged on the stage to now demanding its stand right next to the biggest names in combat sports. And that's why this thing resonates so much. Because no matter who you pick, no mat, which side you lean on, the truth is, both of these women are titans in their own right. Both of them changed the game, and the fact that we're even having this debate shows how far it's come. Like, think about that. We're not arguing if women can fight anymore. We're arguing who would win in a battle between two of the greatest of all time, and that alone is progress. That alone is cultural impact. So in the end, maybe the real win isn't who gets their hand raised in the fantasy simulation. Maybe the win is that they both elevated the sport to a place where this conversation even matters. And honestly, that's beautiful. That's the fight game. That's greatness. So good luck to everybody chasing their dreams, whether you were in a ring, an octagon, or just battling through life. Keep swinging, keep grinding, and thank you guys for riding along on this thought experiment. It's been fun, it's been wild, and I appreciate the hell out of you for sticking with it.